Welcome to the next chapter of my novel, Letting Go. And if you like it, please do subscribe to the channel and you will be notified each time when I can add to what we've already heard. Today, chapter 2 is on Feeny, and the first subchapter is called It Dawns. The day after Feeny's CT scan, she and her husband, René, were supposed to call the family doctor, or he was going to call them back to tell them the diagnosis. They had decided to take their daughter, Alina, to school together and then spend the summer morning in the garden of a pub near Alina's school and make or take the call from there. Jan, their son, was already at his school. Looking at the phone call, they were worried, but they weren't too worried yet, hoping that it was all just a haunting moment. It was a balmy morning. They were sitting in the garden of the pub. The grass smelled fresh. The fog had just lifted. They were drinking Pimm's and had ordered a small dish, even if they couldn't really enjoy the dawning sun because there was no denying the tension with which they were awaiting the phone call, and they were waiting outside. They were the only guests that morning who had ventured outside. It was still fresh, rather cold. Somehow the Pimm's tasted more bitter than usual. Even before they reached for their cell phones, they rang. Feeny picked it up, but immediately passed it on to René. Conversation was brief. The family doctor said that the suspicion of ovarian cancer had been confirmed. They should make an appointment at the local hospital for further examinations. Feeny, who had overheard the loud conversation, looked at René. René held her gaze, hung up, and took a deep breath. Say what? René thought. Did the information reach her at all? She looked petrified. The doctor had obviously called from her surgery and had not given the impression that she could or wanted to go into more detail about the diagnosis over the phone. Feeny and René were so overwhelmed that they couldn't answer or ask anything apart from saying thank you. René just said briefly, "We'll make the appointment." He couldn't think of any other question either. Like Feeny, he was simply overwhelmed. When the phone went silent, they continued to look at each other as if one of them had to break the spell and know what to do next. Then tears welled up in Feeny's eyes. She sank back in her chair. René moved closer to her and took her hand. "Before I call the hospital, let's do some thorough research first. We don't know anything yet." Feeny nodded silently, her gaze blank, the doctor's brief words echoing in her head. Suspicion. Confirmed. Confirmed. Until she spoke them. What does it mean, René? Suspicion confirmed? Well, the doctor doesn't seem to be sure yet, but it all looks like the CT points to cancer. Me? Cancer? Ovarian cancer? I've no pain, just the pressure in my abdomen, a strange feeling in my vaginal area. Should I really have cancer? "Now let's wait and see," said René. "We need more information that can be dealt with safely. We'll get all the information we need, as we have done with everything we've done so far. Let's get through this together. Set off on a journey, and we'll both do it together." Feeny nodded again. Her eyes didn't seem to be able to produce any new tears. He offered her his arm, but she refused, stood up and took a few steps towards the parking lot while he headed for the bar to settle the bill. After returning home, René looked up the diagnosis of ovarian cancer on the internet. He quickly realized that if the CT diagnosis was confirmed in further examinations and treatment was even possible, he would need the best treatment and thought of university colleagues and specialists who might be able to help Feeny. He did some more research and found a specialist in Manchester who seemed to be internationally renowned and wrote her an email. She replied within 20 minutes while he continued his research. The lady recommended the University Hospital in Manchester for further examinations. They should do on an ultrasound first, and had also recommended a surgeon, including an oncologist, a colleague of hers. René wrote to him straight away, and his email was answered in less than 5 minutes. They had an appointment at the University Hospital that same week. In another phone call, he arranged an ultrasound for the same day at a private clinic in the city. They could come straight to the appointment, and they would be given information immediately after the examination. René took the money for the examination with him in bills. Feeny agreed after René told her about the ultrasound appointment, and they drove to the small clinic at the outskirts of the city. There, they were greeted with a friendly nurse at reception. She took Feeny's details and immediately led them into an examination room with a machine which, judging by the monitor, was an ultrasound. They barely had to wait before an oncologist came in and took the medical history questionnaire from the nurse and read it with an obviously concerned look. "Mrs. Weingarten, please make yourself free down and sit in the chair." Feeny was familiar with this chair from her gynecologist, and even though she was used to it from her period checks, she always had the same feeling of being completely at the mercy of the doctor. But on this day, it was even more difficult for her to get rid of her pants and underpants and sit naked on the chair. The busy nurse stood by her and covered her shame. The doctor explained briefly, "Excuse me, I need to insert the one into your vagina to examine the uterus. It will be cool and uncomfortable for you." Feeny gave a sign for approval. "Mr. Weingarten, if you like, you can stand here next to the monitor and I can explain what you can see." René approached the machine with a built-in monitor, which was initially complete black except for Feeny's name, patient number, and her date of birth, the 13th of January 1966. Then light and dark shadows appeared on the monitor. With his free hand, the doctor moved the cursor on the monitor, fixed an image, pressed save, placed a yellow cross, drew a yellow line to the newly placed cross, and a millimeter indication appeared on the monitor. "I suspect," the doctor continued, "that this mass here is either a cyst or, judging by its structure, more likely a solid cell structure." The procedure was repeated several times until the doctor pulled out the rod and placed it in a container for disinfection. He bent over Feeny. "I would still like to palpate her abdomen and then use another ultrasound probe to examine the cavity." Again, Feeny gave him the sign of her agreement. The doctor disinfected his hands again and applied a bluish paste to a small terminal device that looked like a widened fist, which he held in his other hand. "It will seem even colder. Please don't be frightened," he said to Feeny. "Oh, thank you. Everything's okay," she said, and closed her eyes. It seemed to her as if her abdomen had switched off all sensation. Even though she had initially experienced the penetration of the metal rod as a slight pain, all sensation had suddenly gone. The cold roll on her stomach was different, as she felt extremely uncomfortable in some places, as if the doctor was pricking her stomach here and there. René saw how the doctor held Feeny's kidneys with his hands on the right and left at the same time, palpated her pelvis with his fingertips, then her abdomen, and asked whether she felt any pain here or there. Feeny shook her head in some places, then nodded in others. Once again, the doctor rolled one hand and a metal fist over her abdomen, the lower abdomen, down to the pubic area. Again, he measured dark and light, image shadows, and stored them. Then he put this device aside and washed his hands. You can get dressed again. Thank you very much, she said. And when you're dressed, you can take a seat here, please. The nurse pushed a changing curtain in front of the chair and Feeny got dressed. René moved his chair for Feeny to the doctor's desk and sat down himself while the doctor called up the ultrasound images again on his computer. If you know which clinic you want to go for further examinations, please let me know and I'll have the images sent there with my assessment. Feeny sat down next to René and René asked, "What's your assessment?" Mrs. Weingarten, you had already received the initial results of the CT scan from your family doctor, and I'm sorry to tell you that what I saw on the ultrasound and what I could feel supports this diagnosis. I felt and saw that there are masses in the area of your ovaries, also towards the peritoneum, perhaps also near the liver. But I want to add right away that it is unclear at this point whether we are dealing with cysts, which are often benign, or whether we are dealing with a cellular structure that may be benign or more likely be malignant. Even if there are benign cases, the findings so far tend to indicate that we're dealing with growths in the area of ovaries and the peritoneum. Fluid has accumulated in between, which indicates ascites. However, only a preliminary diagnosis is possible with a CT scan and an ultrasound. So to be sure and to make the diagnosis more precise, further examinations are needed, including a puncture if necessary. I would advise you to contact an NHS clinic and make an appointment as soon as possible, because they can carry out the necessary examinations such as blood tests and the like, and will discuss the next steps with you. Feeny looked at René, because she had lost the thread even after the first half sentence. René confirmed to the doctor that he had understood his message. He thanked him and also took note of his offer that they could call him if they had any further questions. Back in the car, Feeny had pulled herself together and regained her composure. "Thank you for going with me," she said to him. "I don't know how I could have got through it without you, René. I was gone after the first examination and I could hear the doctor from far away as it is. I could only see him through a fog. It wasn't easy for me either, Feeny. I felt so much for you." "Yes, but you have to listen carefully, because I don't hear anything. You have to listen, please, René." "I'll do it, I promise," said René. They drove to her apartment. Feeny got out of the car. Alina had to be picked up. School was about to end. Feeny stayed at home while René drove to school. It was the longest drive to school yet. How should he tell Alina? How should he express it? They didn't know exactly yet. But Alina had probably already sensed that something was wrong with Mum. She had also heard that they had to break off their work trip to Feeny's desert oasis in Morocco a day earlier, fully of worry. She must have heard that Feeny had gone to the doctor. But Alina hadn't asked, perhaps out of fear. She must have sensed that ever since Mum had been to the CT scan, they had been feverishly awaiting the result. That journey was long. But it ended sooner than René would have liked. Today, of all days, the usual eternal traffic jam to school was blown away. He would have preferred to drive past the school and stop at the pub where they had waited for the phone call in the morning. First to think, to endure, to consider what he would say to his daughter. But he didn't get a chance to think. When he turned into the school, Lena was already standing in front of him. She was beaming, albeit a little unsure. Perhaps he was just interpreting her look. Alina got in the car, immediately gushing about what she had just experienced, the friends, the teachers. She also immediately realized that Dad was listening attentively. But she was used to that. "You don't know anything about my life anyway," she sometimes said. In fact, he often had too short an antenna for her, and certainly not at that moment, although he had wanted to tune into her. Without appearing too gloomy, he interrupted her and stopped her flow of words. "Mum got the results of her CT scan this morning, and the doctors think there's a suspicion of ovarian cancer." He had not said yet, not the last word, when Alina burst into tears. It took his breath away. What could he say? He would have loved to scream and cry along with her. Now the traffic jam had caught up with him. They drove, stop and go in the queue of parents picking up their children. In the car in front of them and behind them, yesterday was like today. Only in their car did tears seem to be flowing, while in front of and behind them the world was at a standstill. Then ran on, standing, and ran on again, like every day. "Oh no!" Alina burst out. "Is Mum dying now?" "We don't know. And it's not yet completely certain what the cancer is, but the doctors say that if it becomes so certain, it would be a very serious illness." Crying again. "Clara's mum died of cancer," said Alina sadly. "It was terrible. Clara cried so much, and we, the whole class, cried with her." "Yes, we're scared too. Mum, me, all of us. But we don't know anything for sure yet. There will be more tests next week." Alina looked apathetically through the car window, and René could see her puffy eyes in the rear view mirror. He would have liked to take her in his arms, but he had to keep an eye on the traffic jam. He couldn't tell whether she was feeling sorry for him, whether he was feeling sorry for her, whether they were feeling sorry for each other. His own pain and the pain with and for Alina ran through his whole body as if he were reeling at the wheel. Jan would come home from school later. He would have to deliver the message a second time. How could the broken heart continue to break? Everything was sore, open, wide. Feeny had been waiting at home, anxious about how she would meet Alina. When Alina walked through the door, they both hugged and cried together. René still had to pick up Jan, which gave him a few minutes to himself. He took Alina's school bag from the car in the apartment, stroked Alina's hair, which was sticky with tears, then stroked Feeny's worried cheeks and made his way to Jan. Again, he was the bearer of bad news. Even as he drove up to the school gate, stopped, pressed the code into the number field on the gate, and that opened silently the second time he pressed it, he usually saw Jan standing at the top of the parking lot. René looked around and saw the central building, which looked like a small version of King's College, Cambridge Chapel, a Gothic sacred space in the middle of a meadow surrounded by Renaissance buildings. The school looked like a medieval college. It was a school for the musically gifted, one of England's special schools, whose graduates traveled the world as concert musicians and then continued their education at music colleges. It offered a boarding school, but also was open to some commuters who lived at home with their families like Jan. Jan had initially wanted to go to boarding school, but because Feeny and René thought he was still too young at the age of 8, he still lived with them. Jan was standing there that day in his jeans and t-shirt, happy to be picked up by Dad. Jan waved to René with a slight smile. When René parked the car, Jan ran to meet him, opened the door, got in, looked at Dad, nodded, and sat in the back seat without making eye contact. He sat there quietly and, as so often, didn't say anything about the day at school. Before René could start speaking, Jan interrupted him. Dad, you don't need to say anything else. I already suspected it. The way Mamuchka has been in the last few days, you too. Come on, let's go and see her. Jan pushed René's shoulder off the back seat, waved him off, and they drove home in silence. Feeny was already in bed. She was probably asleep. Alina was also in bed, even though music could still be heard from her room. Jan took his school bag to his room, came back down, sat downstairs with Dad in the living room. After a while, he asked him if they wanted to watch something together. Gladly, said René. René fiddled with the monitor, plugged in the cable, pressed on the laptop, but the monitor wouldn't flicker. Dad, give me the laptop, Jan said, and with a few quick taps, the monitor connected to the laptop lit up in front of them, and an episode of Come Dine With Me started. Jan rocked in his IKEA chair, which his parents had bought for him when he was 6 years old, but now with being 13-year-old, he still loved it, even though it was far too small and had become far too narrow for him, despite his small stature. René sat down next to him, and just like that, and they watched the episode together. It wasn't until the next morning, when René had barely got up and was in the hallway on his way to the bathroom, that Jan spoke to him. The door to his room, opposite the bathroom, was ajar. Dad, what's going to happen to Mamuchka? Son, I don't know, but it won't be easy. Jan nodded, then closed his bedroom door from the inside. René went into the bathroom. He had the feeling that Alina and Jan were suffering from the same mental offshoots of Feeny's cancer that had also spread to him, without him realizing how to deal with it. To admit to himself that the whole family was suffering from this miserable disease. It frightened him to take something away from Feeny's very own experience, not to take her seriously, to trivialize the tragedy she had to go through and must go through, and to dilute it with the outward tearfulness of family members. But perhaps it was just his own fear, his fear of pain and his own refusal to let the claw of illness get to him, under the pretext of wanting to protect his children by not addressing Feeny's cancer. So far, the first subchapter. The next chapter will read All the Best, Feeny. Thanks for listening today, and I hope that tomorrow we will have a next subchapter. Thank you. If you want to join me again, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.